by Ross Dowd at People Praying at last year's Southern Baptist Convention. Credit Mitt York, Associated Press. Among Trump's supporting religious believers, the long odds he overcame to win the presidency are often interpreted as a providential sign. Only God could have put Donald Trump in the White House, which means he must be there for some high and holy purpose. The trouble with this theory is that it's way too simplistic about what kind of surprises an interventionist deity might have in mind. Such a god might, for instance, offer political success as a temptation rather than a reward, or use an unexpected presidency not to save Americans but to chastise them. We're a long way from any final judgment on God's purposes in the Trump era. But so far the Trump presidency has clearly been a kind of apocalypse, not yet in the world historical calamity sense of the word, but in the original Greek meaning, an unveiling, an uncovering, an exposure of truths that had heretofore been hidden. That exposure came first for the Republican Party's establishment, who were revealed as something uncomfortably close to liberal caricature in their mix of weakness, cynicism and power worship. It came next for the technocrats and the data nerds of the Democratic Party, who were revealed as ineffectual, clueless and self-regarding in opposing Trump's clown car campaign. And then it came for a range of celebrated media men, from Harvey Weinstein to Matt Lauer, who found that, in the backlash against Trump's misogyny, their own sins were suddenly exposed. But the unveiling has not been confined, as Trump's providentialist supporters might like to imagine, to institutions and individuals that have arrayed themselves against him. It has come as well for figures whose style anticipated him, Roger Ailes, Bill O'Reilly, that whole menage, and for figures who have deliberately attached themselves to his populist revolt. The sins of Roy Moore were more exposed by the Trump era, and now likewise the racist paranoia of Roseanne Barr. And lately a similar moral exposure has come to precisely the sector of American Christianity where support for Donald Trump ran strongest, the denominational heart of conservative evangelicalism, the Southern Baptist Convention. Receive arguments and opinions on the pressing social issues and hidden stories around the World Cup right in your inbox. Sign up for Offsides. The main case is Paige Patterson, the now erstwhile president of a major Baptist seminary in Fort Worth, who was eased into retirement over revelations that he'd counseled abused women to return to their husbands and allegedly shamed and silenced at least one rape victim. But the outpouring of female testimony inspired by his case suggests that Patterson is a beginning, not an end. Judgment has now come to the House of the Southern Baptist Convention. The Baptist theologian and seminary president Al Mohler wrote in an agonized reflection last week, and the terrible swift sword of public humiliation has come with a vengeance. That humiliation has also helped expose a division crucial to the Baptist future. Late last year I wrote an essay speculating about the possibility of an evangelical crisis in this era, driven by the gap between the older and strongly pro-Trump constituency in evangelical churches and those evangelicals, often younger, who either voted for the president reluctantly or rejected his brand of politics outright. But I didn't anticipate that the crisis would take a specific sex and power form, that the Trump presidency and the I probably should have, with the Patterson scandal, that seems to be what's happening. As the veteran religion reporter Terry Mattingly writes, the big story behind the story of Patterson's fall is a high-stakes showdown between two generations of Southern Baptist leaders. Both generations are theologically conservative, but the figures raising their voices against Patterson have been, generally, associated with a vision, whereas Patterson's defenders represent, again, to generalize, the more pro-Trump old guard in the Baptist world, with a strong inclination toward various forms of chauvinism and Christian nationalism. It's not a coincidence that Russell Moore, perhaps the most prominent anti-Trump Baptist, provided early support to Patterson's critics, while Robert Jeffress, whose Dallas church sets "Make America Great Again" to music, labeled the calls for Patterson's resignation a witch hunt, as a non-Baptist with a fellow Christian's interest in evangelical battles. I'd like to tell a simple story that describes the Patterson scandal as an inflection point, after which Moore's kind of Baptist will inevitably increase while Jeffress's kind diminishes, as the judgment that Mohler describes leads to a general reckoning with the pull of sexism and racism within conservative-leaning churches. But to assume that's necessarily going to happen is to fall into the same inevitabilist trap that ensnares both arc of history progressives and providentalist Trump supporters. Instead, it's wiser to regard an era of exposure like this one as a test, which can be passed but also failed. A discredited, old guard, doesn't automatically lose power, a chauvinism revealed doesn't just evaporate. And the temptation to dismiss discomfiting revelations as fake news, to retreat back into ignorance and self-justification, is at least as powerful as the impulse to really reckon with the truth. So the question posed by this age of revelation is simple. Now that you know something new and troubling and even terrible about your leaders or your institutions, what will you do with this knowledge? For Baptists as for all of us, the direction of history after Trump will be determined not just by Providence's challenge but by our freely chosen answer.